Okay, so this one is going to be a little extra rambly, but I promise it'll pay off in the end. This one is going to be about, first it's going to be a character creation video, so the next in that series of videos. But it's also going to be its own more standalone topic, but it's going to be about music and communicating your character's traits. Sounds weird, right? Well, to start, I want to talk about 3 different types of video games. And those are character action games, FromSoft games, and fighting games. More specifically Soul Calibur, just because that's the one I know the best. So first in character action, actually I'm going to talk about FromSoft last. So, in character action games, very similar to fighting games, you don't have a lot of time to communicate most enemies' motivations and character traits. You have the whole game to communicate the main characters and recurring side characters and stuff. But for a boss that shows up at like the end of a level, you don't have a whole lot of time. You've got, maybe an appearance at the start of a level or somewhere in between, and then you have the cutscene that plays before the boss fight itself, and then presumably their death scene, or if they get away, that kind of thing. And having a boss like that show up multiple times helps a lot. But not every game and not every character is going to have that much time to really show all these long cutscenes with character dialogue and back and forths. It really depends. Especially the frenetic pace of these types of games. And if you don't know, a character action game is a game like, say, a Devil May Cry, a Bayonetta, or the specific example I'm trying to hone in on all the time, Metal Gear Rising. Now, that's not to say those games don't have long cutscenes and stuff like that, but they do a lot of the characterization work in a few ways, and in the same ways I think that fighting games do. But for Metal Gear Rising, they do it through initial cutscenes and stuff, and that's good. They do it through animations and how the character acts and moves, their quotes in the middle of fights, and their music. For Metal Gear Rising, that's the big one. The composer of that game, to my understanding, took a bigger risk and really tried to hone in on the character's different traits with the music tracks. The vocals and the lyrics are all character motivations and internal monologues and angst and stuff. So, the music, you're not really going to be listening to it in the middle of the game, but it's the type of thing that if you go and listen to it separately, things about that character start to click. You're like, oh, that character is lying to themselves about these types of things. And then maybe you go back and play the game again, fight that boss again, and you see little details you didn't really see before. And, that stuff is fun. It's just so great, so interesting. But that's something character action games, it's not that they can do, it's almost something they have to do. Because you don't have a lot of time with the characters to really get to know them. And fighting games are very similar. But with fighting games, you can do it even more with animations and quotes and stuff. Less with the music, and a lot of the time character themes are more about kind of general vibes. They're not frequently going to have lyrics, though the recent Guilty Gear did. And a lot of those songs are kind of hit and miss, but they're all great. Songs are generally just more vibes and kind of background stuff for individual characters. Characters get characterized much more through their intro animations, There are animations in the middle of fights, specific quotes, and of course win and lose animations, losing, winning quotes, all these things. Like, think Street Fighter, and Guile is always, in his winning poses, he was always pulling out a comb and fixing his hair. Communicates very simply, he cares about his appearance, he cares about his hair, or that specific hairstyle just requires a lot of upkeep. Whether or not he's vain is, that's up to interpretation. But that's the thing, interpretation's great. But in a game like Soul Calibur, for example, Ivy is characterized in a lot of interesting ways. She's if you've never seen that character, she is wearing this ridiculous, skin-tight, super skimpy, dominatrix lingerie outfit everywhere. It's a heated debate between a lot of people. It's like, does this costume make any sense? And in fact, in one of the more recent games, they made some weird, half-assed justification for why she wears that. And it's been 20 years in real time since they actually discussed it, but it was it's fine. It's a visual motif because she has this big dominatrix persona. Her weapon is a sword whip that splits off. She has a lot of moves that bind and control the opponent. And a lot of her quotes are about her dominating and subjugating her opponent. Things, quotes I can't think of anyone, be still, sit down, and her critical edge, her super, in Soul Calibur 6, is she launches them into the air, she wraps up the sword, does a big, binding, alchemical, magic sign bullshit. Then she pulls them down to earth, and as she does, she says, "It's time for your treat," and drives her heel into the back of their skull as they hit the ground. That's great characterization. It really drives home that persona. But then, if you play her story modes and some of her other quotes, certain win quotes and certain little things here and there, they pepper in the doubt and the loneliness this character has. And it suggests one of the reasons she's she has this dominatrix persona in her martial arts and fighting style is because she has this cursed blood that she doesn't want to pass on, so she avoids any kind of actually sexual relationship or anything like that because she doesn't want the chance of having a child and passing on this curse, which that could be reading into it really heavily, but it's a cool justification. It's a cool motivation for that type of character. And a lot of the time, that's how you can communicate these types of things. How your character behaves in combat, exactly what they say in certain situations, how they go about, if your character doesn't really like killing, for example, any chance they get, they either do non-lethal damage and try to take people prisoner, or they try to kill as painlessly as possible if they're proficient at it. This is how my Dragonborn Samurai does it. He's very reluctant to kill, but he knows he has to. And that's a big struggle for him. But then if you're a character that loves killing, you can lean into that. And it's really easy to communicate those types of things just through little, oh yeah, I cut this guy in half. Just bullshit. But then the next thing I want to talk about, and then I'll get more into music, specifically for character creation. FromSoft games. The thing they do really well is what's usually called more atmospheric storytelling. There's very limited dialogue. There's very limited cutscenes in this game. A lot of the story is told through the environment and the atmosphere, and through item descriptions. You get little bits of history. But one of the big ones, the atmospheric angle, you might walk into a mad doctor's laboratory in one of their games, and you find, lots of like physical boosting items, but not a lot of healing items. And you don't see a lot of healing items, like a lot of spent. Like if the healing item in the game has a really specific look, or like the tertiary, or if there's like in Bloodborne, there's a heal with blood, but there's also some tertiary kind of healing items like antidotes and stuff like that. Maybe you don't find any of that, or like you don't find any painkillers, things like that, to really communicate that this doctor did not care about the well-being of their patients and they just wanted to experiment. So it's usually with atmospheric storytelling, it's details that you have to put together yourself. And sometimes, sometimes if you're going for that approach, players are going to miss that stuff. Like with Rascris, I had a few details that all the other players never asked me about, so they never came up. But I was okay with that. Which is another detail from FromSoft games, that they don't care if you miss things. And like again with the bosses in FromSoft games, it relies on you putting together little details. So in that way, it can feel more rewarding that you figured something out about these characters. And I think those are all like really valuable ways to get your character's characterization across. You can be more overt with some things. You can be more. You can be much more. I'm gonna say clandestine with certain qualities. Like with Rascris, he fought with a kanabo, a big club, but he had a katana and a wakizashi at his hip this whole game, and it was bound with leather. He would never use it. Players never asked me about that, but that was a detail about his history and the fact his family's forbidden to use swords. And even though he's not in his home city anymore, the only place where he's forbidden to draw swords, he still didn't do it. Like, he was still very honor-bound, and that's just the type of person he is. But they never asked him about it, so they all kind of missed it. And that's fine, I think. But going back to character motivations, or character creation in music, a big thing for Rascris was that he takes a lot of inspiration for his, what I'm considering, his overall character arc and the places he's going to go, and his base motivations from both Raiden and Jetstream Sam from Metal Gear Rising. Right now, in the game, he's kind of struggling, or he's starting to struggle with this idea that his sword is a tool of justice, but all a sword does is kill people. You can make the argument that sometimes killing one person saves another, or can save many, but you're still killing a person. Is that okay? But take a lot of that kind of inspiration from the main theme. Where's that sunbeam coming from? Take a lot of that kind of inspiration from the main themes of Jetstream Sam, and Raiden doesn't exactly have a main theme. Why? Drivers. So, one of the main themes about Jetstream Sam, he's super confident and cocky and jovial, but if you listen to his theme, he doesn't know who he really is. He's been lying to himself all his life. He was raised as a swordsman, and he's incredibly talented. But what does that mean? What does that do for him? What is the value of his swordsmanship? What's the point? What is the point of his swordsmanship? Does it have any value? Because all it's good for is killing people. is that something he wants to be? And how much of those things were forced upon him by just nature of being born into the family that he was. And you can pull that motivation just from a song. It's kind of like how, lots of people like to put quotes from songs. They internalize like little messages from a song, and I think music for me is a really valuable character creation resource. It might not be great for everyone, but for me, I think it works. Another, like Senlir, my ASMR barbarian follower of the Raven Queen, he relates to, like, he has some similarities with the character of Blade Wolf from Metal Gear Rising. And that character's theme, I'm my own master now, is about figuring out how to be your own person. Because that character is an AI that was programmed for specific things. And if he violated like the pre-programmed rules, his memory would be wiped and he would just reset to 0. But then he gets rescued kind of by the main character, and that those limits, boundaries, whatever, are removed, so he can start to grow and become his own person and figure out how fate works for him, things like that. And Senlir is going to go along that path. Not as heavy, and it's not going to be quite as existential, but that's a direction Senlir is going to go. Yeah, another thing is you can use music to communicate, like in the other direction. You can use music. You can use the city of Munich. You can use music to kind of communicate who your character is, like in the opposite way. Like the idea of putting together a playlist for your character, and each song can translate something about the character. I think is a really cool idea. But yeah, that's some stuff on how characters in other forms of media, mainly video games, are kind of communicated, and the ways you have to do characterization in certain settings, and how it relates to TTRPG characters.